Good rainy morning to you. This is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. Today I wanted to share with you my 4 favorite easy growing perennial ground covers. Before we can get into what those are, let's talk about why you want to have a ground cover. What is a ground cover? So I'm in Zone 8B in Portland, Oregon, and these ground covers I'm going to be discussing all grow in zones 5 through 10. So if you live elsewhere, you may need to adapt, and some of them you can push farther into Zone 4. But where I am, these are all great perennials, and they produce really well year after year. So what is a ground cover? In permaculture, we talk about growing polycultures, which just means we cultivate many things together. As you can see from this small portion of my backyard, I like to grow plants together that benefit each other and benefit the ecology and produce yields for me. So I'm going to grow a diversity of species together. And in permaculture, we think about those things being in layers, all the way from the canopy tree layer, which would be the hawthorn in my neighbor's yard and conifer trees over there, to a sub-canopy layer, all the way down to the ground cover plants. So ground covers, obviously self-explanatory name, they are low-lying plants that cover the ground. Why do you want plants to cover the ground? Well, nature doesn't like bare soil. And if you are familiar with gardening at all, you'll know that if you have bare soil, she's going to colonize it with something. Would you rather you choose what she colonizes it with and pick a plant that is going to support your fruit-producing shrubs like the Saronia berry and your trees like this filbert? Or do you want to have it be something that you might consider weedy? Now, that's a whole other discussion, what weeds are in permaculture and if weeds are even a thing. But if we are designing for plants that support each other, let's decide what we grow as a ground cover. So for me, those low-lying plants, I want them to be perennial. And I also grow annual ground covers. You can see a lot of them out here in my veg patch. But I like perennial ground covers that take care of themselves, and I like ones that spread slowly and in a way that I can easily control. So things that don't have really brittle stems or really deep roots, so that if they spread where I don't want, I can easily remove them from that area. So we grow ground covers, one, so that we choose what covers the empty ground. We choose what fills in that bare soil. 2, why does nature want to cover up bare soil? Well, if you have a plant growing there, it has roots that anchor the soil and prevent erosion. It produces roots, and sometimes they fix nitrogen, and it produces plant material that eventually will die in a cyclical fashion and therefore add biomass to the ground, right? So these 4 that I'm going to discuss with you all today, they die back in the winter, and the plant matter then becomes more soil over time. When you have a ground cover, like let's look at this mint, which is not one of the 4 I'm going to talk about today because I've already done a video on mint. When you look at mint, you get a plant that, or any ground cover, that is going to shade the soil. And why do we want to shade the soil? Because we want to prevent water loss through evaporation. So when you have a ground cover, you are preventing the ground from being baked, and you're preventing water loss. So a lot of times I see folks concerned that if they grow ground covers that have weeds, that those are competing with their apple trees and their sunchokes for water. And what agricultural science has really shown us is that the job those low-growing plants do of shading the soil is going to prevent more water loss than the amount of water they are going to uptake. So they are not going to compete with your fruit trees. They're going to shade the soil, lower the soil temperature, and conserve water for your fruit trees. Okay? So You get to control what comes in. You get to, planting those plants prevent erosion and water loss. You get to add biomass. So we've already got 4 benefits, and we're not even talking about whether these things produce food for us or for beneficial creatures in the garden. Okay, so let's start with my first plant. So I'm going to walk out into a portion of the garden and let's knock out this first one because I think it is a really common one that is underappreciated. So hang tight. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Let's look at our first perennial ground cover. And this is one that may be familiar to you because it's a common quote unquote weed in lawns, but I would much rather have this than have the monoculture desert of a grass lawn. This is white clover, Trifolium repens. It is a perennial clover. So unlike some of the other clovers, which are annuals, red clover can be a biennial if your climate is warm enough, but most clovers are annuals and need to be sown every year. This clover lives for years and years, and it spreads slowly. It has decorative white flowers with a little bit of a pink blush to them that are fantastic bee food. It is considered a ground cover because it only gets about 6 inches tall, including the flower stalk. Now, with these low-lying ground covers, we've already talked about the other benefits, but being an insectary plant is one that all of the ones I'm going to mention today have. And that means you might need to watch out if you're walking barefoot in your food forest because there might be bumblebees and honeybees on these plants. My kids have been stung a few times over the years. I have yet to be stung because I wear shoes in the garden. But I understand for some people that's really important for them to walk barefoot and have that direct connection with the earth. So just be aware, if you walk through a big patch of clover, kind of shuffle your feet a little bit as if you were at the beach and it's an area with stingrays, right? You just kind of shuffle your feet so you aren't stomping on and squashing any bees. So I love the fact that this clover spreads slowly. I plant it here, it's in my rain garden, but I plant it anywhere there's going to be foot traffic because it's much more resilient to foot traffic than my other ground covers. So it can handle being trampled a little bit. You can see over here, I'm trying to get it to fill this area of the path, and you can see it does get trampled here and it is smaller, but it's still living, and I'm trying to get it to spread here into the walkway. Okay, so that's our first one, Trifolium repens, white clover. You can buy it at any feed store, broadcast sow it in the fall or the spring. It establishes quickly, spreads slowly. It is a really good insectary plant, and also my chickens and ducks really like it. So I pull this up by the handful and I toss it into the chickens and ducks for a little treat. Okay, let's move on to the second one. And actually, I don't need to move to even get to the second one. So, right next to it in the rain garden and several other places in the garden as well, I have this plant. This is Fragaria chiloensis, which is the coastal strawberry. And one of the ways you can tell it is a coastal strawberry and not the other varieties of strawberries is that it has a more leathery leaf and it is not hairy and it has these red runners. So it does spread by runners, but they're very easy to pull up and move where you want, especially early on, and I just shift it around. Now I find that it tends to be a little vigorous in my rain garden here, and it likes to get down into the trough where I have all of my gravel. It's very easy to pull up by the handful and then just move it where I want or compost it. It has lovely white flowers that are good bee food, so it's a good insectary plant, and it spreads very readily on its own. You don't have to fertilize it, you don't have to take care of it. It makes a nice dense low growing mat about 2 to 3 inches off the ground. It's also a good early bee food. It flowers very early in the year here. All right, I'm going to step out of the rain garden and go to another spot in my yard. Leave you with a little look at my aster munch, which is about to bloom. It's just starting to bloom. And I will go find some of my other ground covers. I'll be right back. Okay, we've just covered our white clover and our coastal strawberry, and I have moved up into the front yard to show you another great perennial low-growing ground cover. We're going to move into a pawpaw polyculture here. I have my pawpaw, rhubarb, I have goji berries, aronia berries, blueberries, and underneath as a low-growing ground cover, I grow this plant. And this is Fragaria vesca. So in the backyard, we saw coastal strawberry, and part of the reason I grow that back there is that it's really good at dealing with periods of heavy water and then deprivation. It has kind of like leathery leaves. So it does well when it's very rainy in the rain garden, and then when the tops of the rain garden mounds get dried out in the summer, it can handle that. This is the native wild strawberry. And early in the spring, it is covered in little white flowers that the bees love. And then you can see here the tail end, it produces these little tiny strawberries that have an intense strawberry flavor. So it is closely related to Fragaria virginiana, and in your climate, you may have that more prevalent. They both work equally well for a ground cover. Unlike the Fragaria Chiloensis in the backyard, this has a hairier stem and more delicate leaves. It has just a more delicate look in general. I really like it if you have a fairy garden or a tiny garden. It does very well. And you can see here it's in a path between two hugel beds. So you can see, and it does well as a ground cover and can handle, despite its delicate appearance, can handle getting trampled a little bit. It spreads by runners, just like the other strawberries, and it also is very short, getting no more than 2 to 3 inches tall. It does die back to the ground in winter, just like the others do, but it consistently comes up in the spring no matter how hard the winter is. And again, it's great early bee food, and it produces little tiny tasty strawberries that my kids love to pick. So it's also good kid entertainment, even if the yield is somewhat small. All right, I'm gonna go move to the side yard and share my final low-growing perennial ground cover with you. I'll be right back. All right, so now I wanna show you my last perennial ground cover. And this is one that I grow here, and I also grow in my blueberry polyculture. I think it's a great ground cover for blueberries. This is Viola odorata, the violet. And it grows just a few inches tall. We're going up a slope here, and this is actually built on a molehill, so it actually is quite low to the ground. Viola odorata is a great early bloomer. In my climate, it blooms in February and produces brilliant purpley blue flowers that make beautiful jelly and also provide that nectar source for my honeybees early in the season. So sometimes here it's warm enough that they will do feeding flights in February, and they are very happy to have violets and rosemary. Those are the two things they've really got going for them in February. So Viola odorata, again, has got these purple flowers. There is a native violet here in Oregon that has yellow flowers, and I have that in another part of the garden. I think it does really well in polyculture, but it does spread, which of course we want it to do, but it can spread by runners and also by seeds. So sometimes you end up with it a little bit farther away from the patch than you had hoped, and then you can just pull it up. I think it has a lovely leaf shape. I think it's great for a blueberry polyculture. It doesn't get in the way of my blueberries. They flower at different times, so that area of the garden is providing a succession of blooms for bees. And it's just got a really nice heart-shaped leaf, and it does provide that source of edible flowers as well. So again, we've got our 4 perennial low-growing ground covers. We've got that white clover that fixes nitrogen. We've got our 2 wild strawberries that have a food source for us and for insects. We have this violet, which has lovely purple flowers. All 4 of these ground covers have great visual appeal, and they do a really good job of permaculture stacking functions. They do a really nice job of providing multiple roles in the garden. So they're gonna shade our soil, prevent water loss, prevent erosion, make sure our higher plants in our polyculture, have more water. They're going to prevent colonization of plants that we don't want on bare soil. They're going to produce yields for us and for beneficials and for livestock in our garden. So I hope that was a good starting place for you all with low growing ground covers that are perennial. I will be back. I have lots of other kinds of low growing perennial and annual ground covers that I want to talk about, and some that are a little bit taller. So I'll definitely be making more videos about those, but hope this helped give you a starting place for ground covers for your food forest garden. Thanks.